Hi, my name is Jennifer Delvaux, and thank you for listening in to this reflection today. I have the privilege of reflecting on the readings for Epiphany, so we're going to focus mostly on the Gospel today, which is a fantastic reading from the Gospel of Matthew. But before we dive in, I invite you to just take a moment to quiet yourself, to breathe in the Spirit of God, and to breathe out the tensions and the worries of the day. To breathe in and quiet yourself and remember that God is present in the midst of all those worries and all those concerns. I invite you now to hear the gospel from the Gospel of Matthew, and for those that might be following in their own Bible, it's chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it has been written through the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and ascertained from them the time of the star's appearance. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word, that I too may go and do him homage." And their audience with the king they set out. And behold, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. They were overjoyed at seeing the star. And on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. Then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. These Magi, whether there were three, we don't know, often presumed so because they brought three gifts with them. These three Magi were some of the most learned. They were powerful. They left their own country, probably with a whole entourage, slaves and goods and animals, and they journeyed and journeyed and journeyed, following a star, trusting that this sign would lead them to what they expected, the King of the Jews. And so they went where they would expect to find the King of the Jews, the palace in Jerusalem. And there they did meet a king, King Herod. But the king was not expecting them, was not expecting this news. And as unexpected news often is, it was troubling. And he became fearful. These wise men then were told where to go. They went off to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. From Bethlehem, where they see this star that has been leading this way, and they get to Bethlehem. And you have to wonder, was this little town what they really expected? This was not the city. This was not where you would find a palace. And you have to also wonder, were they a little disappointed to realize that they definitely wouldn't have a comfortable place to stay that night? But they followed the star, and there they found Jesus in a simple home. And in that encounter, they prostrated themselves face down on that ground, likely a dirt floor, and offered to this child their gifts that they expected to be worthy of a king: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold for a king, frankincense for a priest or a prophet, and myrrh for death. as they looked around and they looked at this young mother and they looked at this child, did they wonder whether what they expected would be valuable and welcome gifts? Perhaps weren't quite what was needed. But still, they did him homage. And then that night, wherever they found a space to put their heads, they dreamt. And they had probably expected to at least be able to go and rest again in the palace of Jerusalem. But now they were being warned to return home by a different way. Every step of the way, these magi had expectations. And every step of the way, those expectations were not quite met. Instead of meeting a king in a palace, they met a child in a simple home, in a small town in the backwater. If ever there was a year where we can deeply understand the Epiphany, this is it. Last year, we spent a whole year where a year ago we thought we had plans, we had expectations, we had hopes, and then absolutely none of them could come to fruition. But the Epiphany invites us to remember that in those moments when our expectations are not met, are often those moments when God can break in most clearly in those unexpected ways and in those unexpected people, so that we can have an encounter with God. And if we are humble as those magi, and we're willing to recognize where God is at work in those unexpected moments, then we can be transformed. Because I always like to think that returning home a different way wasn't just about the route they chose to take with their whole entourage, but was rather that there was an intrinsic change within them. They were so transformed, and they returned home. And you have to wonder, for people who had that encounter and who were transformed, what happened when they returned to their homes? What happened when they returned to those halls of other learned men? What happened when they returned to their communities to tell this strange story? Transformation of one person doesn't just affect themselves. When we let loose God in our own life, God finds a way to transform the world around us. And that, I think, is one of the most important things we can learn this year from the Epiphany. We need to encounter God again and again and again. We need to humbly recognize where God is present and to not place our expectations of where we will find God, our expectations for what we want from life, from this moment, from this coming year, but to rather acknowledge that God is present, we're not God, and to humbly invite God to transform us. This is a time of year where we make resolutions. Perhaps some of us have even kind of broken a few of those resolutions already. But instead of thinking about resolutions, think about transformations. I invite you to really think about this invitation to transformative love from God. This invitation to let yourself enter into God's dwelling, God present with you here and now in this moment, whether it's what you expected this moment or this year to look like. God is present with you, Emmanuel, now. And in the year ahead, when we have so many hopes and so many dreams of what we hope the world return to normal, I caution you, do we really want to return to the normal that we used to know? Rather, I think we've seen this year, perhaps more than any year in recent memory, how deeply broken our world is. Our world is broken as a society. We've seen with unvarnished pain how the social net has failed so many people, how we don't have health care for so many people, how racism affects so many people. We see the brokenness of individuals who put their own desires, their own fears, their own apathy above others, where politics can trump the common good, and where causes can replace faith. This is a time when we can ask ourselves, where is God? And how can we be transformed by God? because God is present and inviting us to encounter him in all of the unexpected places and people, whether it's over the next Zoom call, or perhaps when we're walking our dogs, when we're able to go to Mass and God is present in the Word, the Eucharist, and the community. We're invited to remember that God is present among us today and every day, and inviting us to be transformed by God's presence. And so that's what I invite you today to think about, to take some time, sit with this reading, to think about what those hopes and those dreams and those expectations of the Magi were, to talk with God about your hopes and your dreams and your expectations for this coming year, and to listen to what he might have to say in response, to listen to what God might be inviting you to encounter in your own life, and invite the Holy Spirit to fill you and to help you be more open to God's transformative love, to help you understand and to see where God is present in your life, in those that you meet, and in those places that might be hard to see where God's present. Because this is what I do know. It's not a question of transforming the world. God's already at work in the world and has been at work in the world since dawn of time. What it is a question of is, are we willing to cooperate in that work? To do that, we have to encounter God, come to know God, and to humbly invite the Holy Spirit to transform us. So that's my hope for you today. That in all of the unexpected ways, places, and people, that you encounter God and that you invite the Holy Spirit to transform you. God bless.